Disclaimer. This is Mickey Joe from the future telling you to watch all the way to the end of this video because I was reacting to this breaking news story in real time, so I found out some developments literally as they were announced. If it seems like I'm quoting some fake or questionable news throughout this video, watch all the way to the end because the information changes. Oh my god, hey. Emphasis on the oh my god. Welcome back to my stagey YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, my name is Mickey Joe. I am obsessed with all things theatre, which is a blessing and a curse, because sometimes I'm just trying to have a nice weekend at my boyfriend's family home, which is where I am now, by the way, and the theatre world decides to erupt in some sort of chaos. If you've been watching some of my old videos, you will know that these things always happen when I'm travelling somewhere on a train, so really I did this. I closed the Phantom of the Opera. Yes, you heard me correctly. It is over now, the music of the night. We're going to talk about this rumour that has been printed in the New York Post. Allegedly, news is officially coming in the coming days amidst the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II in England, so busy news week. But it has been alleged that the Phantom of the Opera, the longest running production on Broadway, is going to close within the year. Before we get into all of the details and all of the drama, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Mickey Joe. I'm an independent theatre critic, pundit and content creator based here in the UK. I review shows that I've been invited to see in London and around the United Kingdom, and I talk about news, drama and gossip happening on both sides of the Atlantic. And this definitely qualifies. If that sounds like the kind of content that you would like to see more of on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to my stagey YouTube channel. If you enjoyed today's video, feel free to give me a super thanks down below after you have liked and subscribed. Also go find me on all the other social medias. I am Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I'm also pretty sure that's my Snapchat name. Do I use it? Not really. Now let's talk about the Phantom of the Opera and, as always, Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, because somehow that show is also involved in this. It's going to haunt me until I die, literally. Everything's always going to be about Cinderella. It's always been Cinderella. Excuse me, I need my phone. Okie dokie, so let's give a little context to this first of all. So this is all seeming very familiar. I'm getting a little bit of stagey deja vu. Stage-ja vu? That's not a thing. Because during lockdown, a few years back, here in the UK, Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh took turns giving a series of confusing and misleading and contradictory statements that I attempted to explain in a series of videos here on my channel about the closing of Phantom of the Opera here in London. It was initially alleged that the London production would close, and not much clarification was given on this. A lot of people reacted to this with shock. Phantom is closing, this is huge, terrible, shocking, surprising news. It later emerged that this was more of a temporary period of closure, similar to what had happened with Les Mis in the West End, where the original production was ending its run and being replaced with a newer, more cost-effective model. And finance has always felt like the principal motivator here. It is almost a replica production, but various parts of it have been cheapened. The orchestra size has been reduced. Some of the set pieces have been updated for logistical and functional reasons, and there have been various other small changes to the brilliant original production of the Phantom of the Opera. I went to go see the show after this new production had reopened in the West End at Her Majesty's Theatre, which will soon be renamed His Majesty's Theatre, fun fact. And again, that's another video that you can go and look at on my channel if you want to know all about all the changes that happened to Phantom here in the UK. And yet, while all this was going on in London, Phantom of the Opera reopened on Broadway at the Majestic Theatre, and it was the same production with no changes to the size of the orchestra, which was the principal grievance of fans worldwide. And this became a big argument against Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh's insistence that the changes had been necessary for the longevity and for the survival of Phantom in the West End, because if Phantom on Broadway can reopen under the same conditions, then why did we need to update the West End version at all? Well, perhaps we're about to find out. Johnny Oleksinski has reported in the New York Post that Phantom of the Opera will close within the year. This has not yet been confirmed by any representatives of the official show, but I will read you what has been said. Phantom of the Opera to close after 34 years on Broadway. Interestingly, with the date that Johnny suggests it will close, that would leave it 1 month short of finishing a 35-year run on Broadway. You would have thought that they would carry on just to achieve that milestone. Phantom loves milestones, as does Les Mis. It's over now, the music of the night. Great minds think alike. The Phantom of the Opera, Broadway's longest running show, significant, will close at the end of the year. Multiple sources told the Post. Multiple sources, and presumably credible sources, for them to run an article this staggering and this shocking. Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical plans to play through the holidays and then cap off its storied run at the end of December. I suspect the final performance will be December 31st, as the show's iconic masquerade number is set around New Year's Eve. That's nonsense and means nothing whatsoever, because nobody in their right mind associates Phantom of the Opera with New Year's Eve as a concept. If it was to stop performances at the end of December, it will be because that is when the best of the holiday and tourist ticket money has dried up. December is a very lucrative month on Broadway. January is an incredibly challenging month for many Broadway shows. It's why you see so many January closures, both on Broadway and in the West End. People don't have the money to spend on expensive theatre tickets right after Christmas has happened. Other sources claim the show will close in the spring after a large 35th anniversary bash. That sounds a little bit more like Andrew Lloyd Webber, doesn't it? Phantom, sources said, has struggled to recover since it reopened in October 2021 following the pandemic closure and is losing some $1 million a month. The last time a Lloyd Webber show was losing so many millions a month, it was Cinderella, which closed unexpectedly here in the West End. When reached by the Post, a Phantom rep denied that the musical is closing, so the official line from the show remains that the musical is not closing. I am wondering if we're getting some mixed signals, lost in translation stuff here, like when a closing was originally announced in the West End and it ended up being a closing of the original production to immediately make way for a replacement, almost replica, but cheaper version of the show. I would not be surprised if that is what is happening here, and the idea of the original version closing has been misinterpreted by certain sources who are sort of close to the production but not connected enough to understand the difference. I would also have thought that Johnny Oleksinski would have done his due diligence in working out the distinction between those two things. This is a journalist who is aware of West End events as well. Notably, Johnny is the New York Post reporter who came over here and gave Cinderella a less than favourable review. This was the review that Andrew was not happy with, prompting him to angrily call the cast from his holiday home in Mallorca. Since its opening night on January 26, 1988, the show, produced by Cameron Mackintosh and Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Group, has played 13,733 performances over nearly 35 years. Broadway's second longest running show, which would be Chicago, is well behind in the race, having been running 25 years and playing just over 10,000 performances. You would have thought if Phantom were to close that Chicago would eventually overtake it, because you don't see that production going anywhere anytime soon. While the two have always both been popular with tourists, Chicago has more ability to put lucrative stars into its roles, which we have seen them doing for several years now, very recently with Pamela Anderson. But another key difference between the two, Chicago is discernibly cheaper to run. Other than the lofty salaries of the stars that they are getting into these roles, you can assume the whole production is not nearly as expensive as the Phantom of the Opera. Reasons being, it's just the one set, the band is smaller, the cast is smaller. And they don't have to drop a chandelier on the audience. I mean, come on now. Talking about the show, yada 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 yada. The production won 7 Tony Awards, Justice for Into the Woods. A flop movie version starring Gerard Butler and Emmy Rossum was released in 2004. That is not at all relevant to this article, but hilarious that we included it. Lloyd Webber also put on an unsuccessful sequel called Love Never Dies in London in 2010 that toured but never made it to Broadway. Wouldn't it be hilarious if this is what it takes for Love Never Dies to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of the Phantom of the Opera? It's not advisable, but it would be hilarious. Phantom continues to play in London at Her Majesty's Theatre, soon to be renamed His Majesty's Theatre, I've told you this already, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and recently had some of its original staging revised. So Johnny Oleksinski is aware of the changes that have been made to West End Phantom. Oh, here we go, he's talked about this as well. That could be a clue to the musical's future. While this Phantom will close for good in December, it would not be shocking to see it return in a much cheaper iteration in a few years. I'm wondering if it's even just a few months down the line, whether they're even relinquishing this theatre at all. And yet, he goes on to say, for now, the Schubert organisation will be pleased. The Majestic Theatre, the best musical house on Broadway, has finally been freed up after nearly 4 decades. The right show could be grossing $3 million a week there, rather than $1 million from Phantom. In fact, Schubert chair Bob Wankel, that's an unfortunate name and I apologise to him, wanted the Majestic for the upcoming musical Some Like It Hot, but was reluctant to give Phantom the boot. Now, the only other difference between the West End production of Phantom that was able to shut itself down completely, gut the theatre — we saw videos of Lloyd Webber standing on a completely empty stage at Her Majesty's and then putting in a new version of the show — and the Broadway version of the show is that Lloyd Webber owns the theatre in London and does not own the theatre on Broadway. So that may make this transitional period more challenging / impossible. Basically, while he can close the show, keep the theatre dark, and then reopen a different version at his own discretion over here, he does not have that luxury in New York. So it really could be that the Phantom of the Opera is closing for good on Broadway. Perhaps, like Johnny says, we will see a cheaper version of the show opening down the line, but if the theatre is that in demand, Phantom may never go back to the Majestic again. It may always manage a quick reopening at a smaller Broadway theatre. It could downsize. We see that happening quite a lot here in the West End. Usually on Broadway, when productions move sideways and downsize, it is because they're going to an off-Broadway house, like productions of Avenue Q, and I believe Rock of Ages have done before. Here in the West End, we see lateral movements all the time. Chicago had moved from the Cambridge Theatre to the Garrick before it ultimately closed. We've seen Mamma Mia go from the Prince of Wales Theatre to the Novello. And the epically long run of Les Miserables in the West End has actually been over various different houses. So this would not be unprecedented for these UK producers. What's interesting is when the changes were announced for Phantom in the West End, there was a tremendous backlash, huge backlash from fans. There was a big campaign to save the brilliant original production, and Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh had both insisted that this was vital for the longevity and the future of the show, and there was a lot of resistance to this. People thought it was a cost-cutting measure. People did not necessarily believe that wholeheartedly. This closure on Broadway may actually confirm what they had been saying this entire time. If we're seeing one production that adapted to the financial hardships and another that has had to close in the face of them, it would suggest that the adaptation is what has allowed it to continue. You've heard me saying in a lot of these videos now for a very long time, this is still an incredibly challenging financial time for producers and for commercial musical theatre, and that we were just about to see the impact of that. And then this happens. I take no joy whatsoever in being proved right about that statement, but let me tell you, it's an incredibly difficult time for the theatre industry worldwide. You've got to assume a lot of Broadway shows and a lot of Broadway producers are nervous. If Phantom of the Opera is closing, that's unprecedented, unimaginable, and huge. And yet, does it provide some other opportunities to some more diverse Broadway shows? Not only will a different show finally be able to play at the Majestic Theatre on Broadway, but the same tourists who are coming to see shows in New York who have not come specifically to see Phantom, the majority of them, but who have come to see a show who would often pick Phantom because it's well known, they will now have to choose something else. It's great news for Chicago and Wicked, or they may even take a chance on something less obvious. Obviously, that's nothing against any of those shows, but they do tend to be the favourites of tourists. So I promised you Cinderella was involved in this as well. Let's get to the end of this article. Johnny Oleksinski says, Lloyd Webber may be back to Broadway soon enough. The terrifically fun London Palladium revival of his Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. If you haven't already, I've made a video about that one as well. Not my favourite version of the show because I'm very fond of that musical and did not like a lot of the creative choices that this revival had made. Saw it again recently on tour, stand by everything I thought the first time. That production has New York in its sights after it plays Toronto's Princess of Wales Theatre this winter, which was kind of the Technicolor writing that was on the wall. From what I understand, Jack Yarrow is probably still attached to launch the production over there, especially because this production isn't as fussed about Joseph. He had the third to last bow in London. He is not the most important part of the show. It is much more about the narrator and some star casting for the Pharaoh. My expectation was that they would approach Donny Osmond to be the Pharaoh in the US. We had Jason Donovan, former Joseph, playing the Pharaoh over here. Symmetry would suggest you would get Donny, who is a huge audience draw, to be the Pharaoh on Broadway. However, from what I have recently heard, that was the plan, but he is far too busy in Vegas. Performing, not just gambling. The man's at work. I'd be very interested to find out who they cast as the narrator on Broadway. That's an interesting question. Principally, it's a great vocal role. There are so many exciting options they could go with. What about Adina? Would they make it Adina? Epic Broadway return for box office draw Adina Menzel in an Andrew Lloyd Webber show. I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be perfectly honest with you. And then finally, this little nugget on the end. A revamped Broadway version of the composer's musical Cinderella at the Imperial Theatre will be announced as soon as next week. So this seems like some very substantial gossip, because we seem to already know the theatre that Cinderella will be going to on Broadway, the Imperial Theatre, a space where I am told it would not be viable for them to stage the ball in the same way that they did here in the UK. Now, given that for a lot of people this was the main highlight of the show, that is troubling. He calls it a revamped version of the show. We obviously don't know what that means, but it has not had a long time to be reworked between its West End closing and now. Unless they have been working on this show flat out, I'm officially registering my concern that the changes to this show will be similar to the changes that it had before when it shut down for a brief period at the beginning of this year. They will be cosmetic, they will be superficial, and they will not be the substantial changes to the material that the show needs in order to make it more dramatically and creatively satisfying. But for now, all of this is news. As and when a Broadway move is planned for Cinderella, you can be sure I will be talking about it in more depth on my channel. Like I said, none of this has actually been confirmed. The New York Post is a credible news source. This is a credible theatre journalist who will have done his due diligence. But at the same time, nobody can resist this kind of a juicy rumour, and everyone wants to be the first to break news like this. But so far, that's all we know about this situation. Hopefully I've made that a little bit more clear for you. I'm not going to waste any more of your time speculating, because we just don't know yet. I will make another video as and when this gets updated, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel and you've got your post notifications turned on so you can find out when that is. In the meantime, feel free to check out some of my other content. I've posted a bunch of reviews recently, as well as a new series in which you can see me each week going to the theatre like 4 or 5 times in a week, various different press nights and events and trips just for fun sometimes. So make sure to go and check those out as well. But I do want to know what you think, so make sure you weigh in the comments section down below. What do you think about this shocking announcement that Phantom of the Opera will close on Broadway? Have you ever got the chance to see the show on Broadway? I've never been to New York, so obviously have not had that opportunity, but I'd be fascinated to know what you thought of it. And for those of you that are Broadway locals or visit often, what do you think this means for Broadway, and what are the implications of this shock closing? As a reminder, if you enjoyed today's video, you can give me a super thanks down below to give me a little tip. That really helps me as a stagey content creator. Or you could go to patreon.com/MickeyJoTheatre, where you can support me and gain access to some exclusive photo and video content. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. Let's try this again. So literally, as I pressed the record button to finish that last little segment of what I thought was going to be the end of this video, the news was then confirmed that Phantom of the Opera is in fact closing on Broadway. No caveats, no immediate announcement of plans to adjust and reopen elsewhere or reopen at the same venue in a different production, just closing on Broadway. Which doesn't particularly explain why representatives of the production denied the closing, other than the fact they may have wanted to break the news themselves. Evidently, that didn't work. The one little bit of false information from the New York Post article was the suggested date of closing. The production will close on February the 18th, 2023, soon after celebrating its 35th anniversary. As predicted, they will have the 35th anniversary celebrations. Lloyd loves a party. Remember when he DJ'd in the street for the show's reopening on Broadway? All of that's going to happen again when the show closes. But the optics will be very different. Rather than a financial failure, it's going to be after 35 successful years as the longest running show on Broadway, setting this record. One other interesting detail from this updated press release that I want to tell you about: the Phantom of the Opera has been the largest single generator of income and jobs in Broadway and US theatrical history. In the New York production alone, an estimated 6,500 people, including 400 actors, have been employed during its more than 3 decades run. That alone earns the production a tremendous amount of respect. My thoughts on the closing are this. Obviously, it is tremendously sad when any production has to close. My thoughts are with the cast, the crew, the musicians, everyone whose jobs were dependent on this production. I feel for you immensely, especially at this challenging time for everyone. In the article that's just been published in the New York Times about this, it does cite the expensive running costs and the large orchestra and the significant number of set pieces as a major factor in Phantom's closing. And that as a statement is pretty strong support for the decisions made to alter the London production to give it more longevity. Time will tell whether that has been enough to save the West End production of the Phantom of the Opera. I think we as theatre fans can often be guilty of assuming that certain shows are just going to run forever and will always be permanent fixtures on Broadway or the West End, but inevitably theatre is temporary. We can do our best to try and capture things and record things and try and sustain a show's legacy and its memory, but ultimately it's happening temporarily in front of you, and each performance exists only in the moment of that performance. Though their legacy can live on, shows cannot and will not last forever. Even the Phantom of the Opera. So now that the news is official, let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Again, have you seen Phantom before in New York? What are your thoughts on this shock closing and what it means for Broadway? Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for sticking with me throughout all of these updates. I thought about going back and refilming the whole thing, but I decided to just give you the news as it had transpired, as I was finding out about it in real time. In the coming days, if there are any major developments, and we are expecting news soon about the announcement of Cinderella's opening on Broadway, check back on my channel. There will be another video on that topic. You can pretend I've said all the things I say at the end of a video all over again. Subscribe, share, like, go to Patreon. Have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!